let's suppose there is no God. Let's suppose there is no omniscient one, no omnipotent one, no all-knowledgeable one, no all-powerful one, no necessary being. Let's suppose, no problem. What do we have? What are the explanations that we have? That the universe came from nothing. But we know from nothing, nothing comes, because nothing is the absence of something.
False dichotomy. Guys, if I ever do one time, okay, the errors Mohammad Hijab does every 10 seconds, if I do one time in my career, my YouTube career, I will stop philosophy. Okay? If I do once, what you just said, Mohammad Hijab, is a false dichotomy. Now, it's not either God exists, either the universe came from nothing. There is a third option. The universe always existed. But please continue. And see whether you will say a single true thing in your whole presentation.
That the universe is self-generated. But we know that that's a contradiction, because the universe cannot generate itself, exist and not exist at the same time. So what do we know? What do we know? We know there exists a universe. We know I exist. We know you exist. We know Oppenheimer exists. And Fasser exists. And hopefully there's not going to be explosions today. Except of the argument that we've just heard. And I will say that when you know that the dependent existences exist, you have two options. Either you have a chain, a finite chain. A depends on B, or B depends on A, C depends on B. In which case A is the beginning of that chain. We, the Muslims, call that the necessary being, the independent one, God.
The contingency argument provides very strong argumentation for the existence of a necessary being, but as the argument itself states, the term necessary being doesn't necessarily mean God, yet alone the specific God of Islam with his specific controversial morality. I can give very good reasons why the contingency argument is in fact an argument against the existence of God. But either way, the contingency argument doesn't say anything about Islamic morality, as it is meant to prove the existence of God, not the truth of Islam. The analogy is someone implying that he's got good reasons against Nazi ideology or in favor of Nazi ideology just because he can provide evidence that humans exist. So just because I can provide evidence humans exist, that means that Hitler, the ideology of Hitler, is right.
Obviously the atheist cannot subscribe to that theory. Let's move away from that one, please. So what do we have left? We have an infinite chain. An infinite chain of dependent things. But an infinite chain of dependent things is an absurd proposition. The reason being, because if this was actualized in the actual world, for example, through an infinite amount of multiverses, then it would imply that the inexhaustible has been exhausted. The unlimited has been limited.
Something always existed. The philosophical nothing never existed. Both atheist and theist can only agree on that, because from nothing, nothing comes. But the same way you can argue God always existed, the same way we can argue a dynamic environment always existed. The way we solve the infinite regress problem is not pretending it's unsolvable. Therefore, unless we use the get out card of God, there is nothing else we can do. That is committing the special pleading logical fallacy. So all the problems nature has against infinite regress, the same problems God has against infinite regress. So the argument goes something like this. Premise 1, there is no way we can solve infinite regress. Premise 2, God is not subjected to infinite regress. Conclusion, therefore, God is necessary to explain the universe. This is a valid argument if the premises are true. The conclusion follows. But the premises are not substantiated. How theists know that there is no way we can solve infinite regress? How they know? Just because now we cannot solve this problem efficiently, that doesn't mean we will never be able to solve that. Premise 2, how they know God is not subjected to infinite regress. Just because your theology said so, that doesn't mean in cosmology that is probable. In fact, everything we know about consciousness is completely subjected to infinite regress. We can begin to imagine weird environments in the cosmos where our current laws of physics breaks down, and we have counterintuitive time, causality, and contingency. Already, quantum mechanics and Einstein kind of physics predict and demonstrate some of these. But how minds evolve in these environments, and how minds, like the mind of God, makes sense without a linear time environment and without a natural world like our own. So the assumption that consciousness solves infinite regress, whereas natural physics is hopeless, is unsubstantiated, to say the least, if not the complete opposite of truth. God first acts and then decides. In fact, God has more problems. A fundamental quantum environment has less problems than God when it comes to infinite regress, because God is a conscious being, the end product of evolution. Consciousness is the most casual thing that is affected by causality and dependent. Consciousness is the most dependent thing you can imagine. How I think now. I get information, I get incentives. How you call that? Erethismus. I get incentives from the environment, and I think. I have my subconscious and tells me all the time what I should think. Okay. When I dream, what I dream? I dream trees, cars, my mother, women, beautiful women, let's say. That is what I dream. Earthly stuff. I don't dream in 11 dimensions. So consciousness is the most thing that is affected by infinite regress. So by saying God did it, you don't solve anything. It's like saying magic did it. You use God like a get out of jail card, like a magic card, and that is a special pleading logical fallacy. Obviously, the boundaries of nature is not the boundaries of our perception. So there must be a fundamental environment outside our current bubble of our universe, of our linear time and space bubble. So there must be a more fundamental reality that time, causality, and contingency are exotic. Okay, so that is what is in fact happening. And you just saying that God did it doesn't solve anything. At least I actually attempt to solve something.
What can you atheists actually present and put on the table? You've got nothing. And the best Mr. Fasser could actually put to the table is to say, naturalism can explain just as well, he says. He's not even trying to say it's better. He's trying for equality. He's got a Nelson Mandela approach to the situation. He does. But so do I, in a different manner. Because in an intellectual way, we will conclude, therefore, that a necessary being through which everything depends upon is independent in and of itself, and everything depends upon is the only way to make sense of dependent things. You see, contingent things cannot exist within necessary things. A contingent thing is possible, can exist or not exist. A necessary thing is not possible, it's impossible not to exist. In other words, contingencies cannot exist within necessities. The existence of dependent things, the existence of this young man here, the handsome one, and Oppenheimer, his forefathers led to a lot of people's non-existence. Not your forefathers, but you know, the other Oppenheimer. Their existence indicates without shadow of a doubt that a necessary being is required. So what kind of necessary being is this? We know I'm different to him, and we know he's different to him, and we know you're different to him. Differentiation indicates possibility and contingency. And wherein there is differences and possibility and contingency, therein there must be an explanation for this. And what is the explanation for this? Islamic theism says, an external sorting agent, which specified and particularized things to be a certain manner, which indicates a choice had to be made. And this, we would say, indicates a chooser, a willer, which we would say is the will of God. So already we've identified that you have to have something which is independent and necessary, post-eternal and pre-eternal, to break away from the infinities and have a will. What do we call that? We call that God. Yes, we do. And it's the only explanation that doesn't lead to contradiction and absurdity. I challenge anybody here today to give me another explanation that doesn't lead to contradiction and absurdity.
Okay, challenge accepted. I conceive the first part of the contingency argument, namely, I accept the need for a necessary being, as described in the argument. I dispute the second part, namely, this necessary being is God. The necessary being, as described in the contingency argument, is something that always exists inevitably, could not have been any other way, and contingent things depend on it. The assignment of will or consciousness to the necessary being goes over the boundaries of the argument, and in fact is something the argument is made to dispute. Will or consciousness are contingent things. Allah, with his specified character and convenient qualities, could have been any other way, and therefore not probable to always exist inevitably, as the argument describes. In contrast, the simplest fundamental form, like some form of a quantum environment, fits perfectly the description of a necessary being as the next logical inevitable thing after the exclusion of the philosophical nothing. All that, of course, are irrelevant, as the contingency argument says nothing about Islam. So the question of this debate is Islam or atheism.
You see, I finished quite early. I've got more to say. I've got more to say, which is, okay, you say, fine, I understand the situation. I agree with you, no problem. But why do you say that Islam is true? Before we get there, one more prerequisite must be made. How could there be only one of these? How come there's not three? For example, the triune situation.
Because people call me the atheist soldier for Christ, let me refute that really fast. Okay, Jesus, remember that when I die. Thank you. Thank you. I need to be modest. Okay, and I will protect the honor of Jesus. So, the apparent contradiction in the Trinity derives from a misread of the Bible, instead a real cosmological impossibility. Mohammed thinks he reads in one place in the Bible, God is one, and then he thinks he reads in another place in the Bible, God is three, and that is a logical contradiction. Yet the Bible describes the Trinity. And in cosmology, a being with the characteristics of the Trinity can exist. I'm not saying that it does exist, but it doesn't contradict logic. So in cosmology, the Trinity, a being with the characteristics of the Trinity, is not contradictory in any form of law. It's not a square cycle. It can exist. Okay. The problem derives from your interpretation of the Bible. You read the Bible in one place, it says one, and in another place, it says three. As long as you describe the Trinity, as Christians describe the Trinity, call it one, call it three, call it a banana. It doesn't matter.
Because if there was an individuating factor that individuated and differentiated necessary being A from necessary being B, that would render either or both of them contingent. Because a contingent thing is differentiated in reality. And a necessary being cannot be differentiated from something else. But I'll give you an easier argument.
Here I will have to disappoint my Christians and Muslim friends. God doesn't fit the description of a necessary being. Not because of the reasons Mohammad Hijab now describes against the Trinity, namely three persons can only be contingent and this kind of stuff, but because personhood refers to consciousness, not material reality. So that is like jumping logical spheres. Apply a dependence argument to the internal characteristics of a single entity in the realm of consciousness. I can say the same thing about Allah. Allah has more than one idea, therefore dependent. Of course, consciousness altogether is dependent and contingent. That's why consciousness doesn't fit the necessary being, the description of a necessary being.
Which is the Quranic argument. مَا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ وَلَدٍ وَمَا كَانَ مَعَهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِذًا لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ وَلَعَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. Chapter 23, verse 91, that there couldn't be more than one God effectively because they would outstrip one another in power. There cannot be more than one overall power because an all-powerful agent by definition, yes, means that he has power over all other things. Nothing can supervene on his power capabilities. Moreover, there cannot be more than one overall will. لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. In chapter 21, verse number 22. If there was in them, i.e. the heavens and the earth, more than one, the heavens and the earth would have been corrupt. Meaning what? You have to have one overriding will.
Okay, guys, that is utter nonsense. Okay, it's a lazy non sequitur mumbo jumbo. There is nothing to respond here because it's just mental gymnastics. No coherent argumentation. But what I am worried about is that, again, this video took forever and I will not have time to sing at the end. That is what I'm worried about. All this philosophy nonsense.
Because it had been more than one will, it wouldn't be consistent. You couldn't explain the uniformity, the regularity, the stability of the universe Because there is uniformity, stability, and regularity. Without it, you couldn't even do science. And there is uniformity, stability, and regularity to the extent which it allows life to exist on the universe. That's a fact no one here will deny. There is life on the universe, and that the universe is uniform and regular and stable enough to allow such life to exist. What is the best explanation for this? One singular overarching will that doesn't lead to conflict.
There is uniformity in the universe. That's why the universe is rationally deductible. That is what Mohammad Hijab said, which is true. But that is not to be, but that is in fact to be expected in the current time-space bubble that we are in the time-space continuum. It's exactly what Einstein physics predicts. Not to say that there is uniformity to the cosmos. So, Mohammed, okay, so imagine the cosmos. The cosmos is everything that exists, and that is our universe. Our universe is one unified time-space thing. So obviously here will be the same with here. But outside the cosmos, another universe has different rules. So according to your argument now, God doesn't exist. Because the cosmos is not has no uniformity. Just our current bubble has uniformity.
So that's why it's one God. But what about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Now there's many things I can say, and in 7 minutes I'll just mention one evidence. There are necessary and sufficient conditions for a word of God to be conceived as such, the word of God. I would put to the table today that one of the necessary conditions is that this cannot contain any contradictions. We are logicians here, The Quran says if this was from other than God, it would have been many contradictions inside of it. لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. The Quran, this is one of the necessary conditions. It's one of the only books to even posit this challenge, religious books, which is find the contradiction within it.
Mohammad Hijab is a complete deluded idiot. There is no other way to put that. The Quran is the most contradictory book ever written in human history. It's the only book, in fact, that needs other books like alliteracy in the Bible, Hadith and Tafsir to make it comprehensible. And even after that, 25% of the Quran, not even the scholars understand. The Quran is the only book that includes, listen to these people, that includes advice what to do with all the contradiction. So imagine how many contradictions the Quran has, that inside the Quran tells you what to do with all the contradictions. You use abrogation. What comes later abrogates what came earlier. Okay, so the first contradiction in the Quran is literally after, I counted the words, is after 24 words. So the Quran was not able to say 25 words without contradicting itself. Not even a sentence. The reason the Quran has so many contradictions is because the Quran was not made as a book. It was is a collection of oral performances. That's why it reiterates itself all the time. So the Quran is a collection of oral performances from many people from a vast time period. Okay, that's why it's so contradictory. Okay, imagine, guys, the contradictions in the Quran overstate human stupidity, ability for being stupid. Okay, so people say that it's impossible as sane human making so many contradictions. And the explanation is that, okay, it was not one human. It was oral traditions gathered and put it together randomly. To claim that the Quran hasn't got contradiction is like saying the sea is not wet. Something like that. You must be a complete idiot, deluded idiot. Mohammad Hijab, and that explains perfectly why you are a Muslim. You are a complete deluded idiot. Sorry, that's the truth. Okay, so when somebody says, I am a Muslim, traditionalist Muslim, I'm not talking about the modernist Muslims who are intelligent, very fine people, but to be a traditionalist Muslim like Mohammad Hijab and Daniel Hakikatsu, you must have something very wrong in your logic, a black hole in your logic. And now you demonstrated that. To claim the Quran hasn't got contradictions, I can argue that it's very difficult to find a single verse in all the Quran without a contradiction of some sort. Imagine, I can literally say that from whole the Quran, maybe 3 sentences are without contradictions. All the rest is one big contradiction. And to read the Quran, every verse, guys, now if I look at Quran, okay, let's okay. And guys, it's even worse than that. Mohammad Hijab just claimed the Quran, not just it hasn't got contradictions, the Quran is a miracle of non-contradiction. In other words, it defies the laws of nature of not being contradictory. So this is what this guy says. He says that the Quran is so much non-contradictory that we can prove it's from God. No human, he says, can make a book. It's impossible, okay? It must be supernatural forces in play. The Quran that cannot say 25 words without contradicting itself. Okay, Mohammad Hijab, listen my words, my friend. Let me use that to be more clearly. No, it's the opposite, in fact. Mohammad Hijab, listen to my words. You are a complete deluded idiot. Okay, let me repeat that. You are a complete deluded idiot. Thank you very much.